Well. A funny thing happened on the way to world hegemony. The neocons' plan to dominate the world seems to have run into some very significant bumps in the road in Ukraine. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here. All right, so let's chat about this, the business about Ukraine. And I think the reason, I've talked about this a lot. Sorry about that, putting my phone away, shutting the sound down, all that stuff. I think it's important to have a discussion again about this for this reason. There's talk, much ado about a potential peace agreement of some time. Of some type. The Chinese have been talking about a peace agreement. There's discussion about an offensive, and I'm putting all this together. There's discussion about an offensive from the Ukrainians, whether or not they're going to do it, whether or not they'll have success. There seems to be a lot of buzz about that. The Biden administration is coming to the realization that the offensive would likely not do well. Not that that means they're not going to do it anyway, because let's face it, not do well, as I stated this way, means that, the Ukrainians would be slaughtered like cattle. That basically you'd be just throwing them into machine gun nests. You would just be taking these human bodies and just throwing them forth into hot metal, and they would be torn to shreds by the many tens of thousands, which many people feel would be the outcome of an offensive. Now, when it comes to the neocons, it's not like they're going to take that into account. If you were to say to Biden and Jake Sullivan, if you do this, Ukrainians will be slaughtered by the tens of thousands, they'd be like, I don't understand what you're getting at. We got an offensive to come. That's from their perspective. That's the job of the Ukrainians. If you have a proxy war, the patron's expectation of the proxy army is to take whatever punishment it needs to give up as many people. Maybe sometimes the job of the proxy army and the view of the patron is just to, in this, as they say in this instance, to weaken Russia. If as we all suspect, the job of the Ukrainian proxy army is to weaken Russia and to keep them occupied for a certain period of time, well, it only goes to say then that their job is to die in large amounts. And if you know anything about the neocons, they don't care how many people die. They're not concerned with that. They have this almost religious, a religious fervor for their ideology. That's the only thing that matters. And of course, their ideology is world domination. Their ideology, their very ideology, it's not, you don't have to go to the depths of their ideology. It's right there on the surface. Read the Wolfowitz Doctrine, listen to what they say, the rules-based order, how they talk about them. So that's critical, because if in fact, which it is, let me put it this way, not if in fact, because their ideology is world domination, you can't possibly look at the Ukraine conflict through the lens of Russia, Ukraine, and European security, simply because that's not what it's about, right? Everybody is there to be sacrificed. You're going to sacrifice the Ukrainian soldiers all that you can in Ukraine. You sacrifice all of that because you've got a greater religious crusade going on here. When it comes to Europe, the same thing. They're not allies. There's something to be used. They're a tool to be used for this world domination plan. And so they thought they were allies, and they were, as long as they needed to be allies. As long as the U.S. needed the Europeans to be allies, they could kind of fit that mold. They could fit that characterization. Now the U.S. doesn't need them as allies. It needs them as fuel to burn, to keep this world domination thing rolling as they see it. So the job of the Europeans is the same as the job of the Ukrainians. So when a discussion of which is happening now, this discussion of some kind of resolution here, I don't see how you can have that truly, really have that discussion of a resolution through the context of European security, through the context of what happens to Ukraine in the end. Does Ukraine get its property back? Does it, I mean, get its, the Donbass back, Crimea back? Does it not get the Donbass and Crimea back? Because the neocons don't see not, Crimea and the Donbass returning to Ukraine through the lens of what's best for Ukraine, or even through the lens of how you end this war. If anything, the only reason the neocons may fight over ending this war is because they want to start another one with China. They want their conflict with China. So they can't get that going until they get this one going. But which shows you what? That the actual plan is world domination. But it's run into a serious headache here. Because the plan was beef up Ukraine militarily, chock Ukraine stock full of weapons, so that it's able to fight the Russians and at best maybe defeat them, hopefully, but if not that, to keep them occupied and to weaken them, to draw them in and to weaken them and to keep them fighting, keep Ukrainians dying, keep Russians dying, they keep fighting, and the Russians get weaker and weaker, and then you don't have the Russia-China alliance. And even if you have the Russia-China alliance, Russia's so weak it can't help them. And ideally, you want regime change, you want some kind of a U.S. puppet in there, and then you want to divide Russia up, cut it up, and hand it, to the victor go the spoils. Here, UK, you can have this region, we'll take this region. France, you can take that region. You want to do it like you did Africa, right? And then once you have that, you'll have more economic power. And you can now, you've isolated China. That's the other idea. You're going to isolate, you're going to reassert your dominance over the world. By defeating Russia, you remind everybody in the world how powerful you are. You reassert your dominance over the world. Everybody has to side with you out of fear. That's the plan, right? It was about reasserting dominance over the world. It was about taking down two enemies. Number one, Russia. They're going to be dismembered. They're going to have a puppet government, whatever's left. You get all of their resources free. And the EU. Germany's getting a little too economically powerful, big for its britches. France is starting to have, think about some kind of a European sovereignty. So you got to take them down. You got three big adversaries, the EU, Russia, and China. In one fell swoop, you're going to take out both Russia and China. Both Russia and the EU. You're going to make the EU subservient to you. You're going to make Russia, part of your empire, and then you're going to move on, and you got China. Game, set, and match. However, they've run into blow after blow here. Let's talk about a couple of the things that have happened that runs counterproductive to that goal of maintaining, keeping, asserting world hegemony. Number one, you expected the global South, Africa, Latin America, etc. The neocons expected they'll go along with us. Why? Because they're afraid. They've got no choice. They're far too weak. So all of the global South countries will go along with us because they're afraid. They're too weak. They know we can overthrow their governments. We can kill them. We can do whatever we want to. They're going to do it. Well, no, that didn't happen. The whole entire global South went along with Russia. Number two, you expect that China will back away from Russia, that they'll listen to your dictates and they'll get out of the way. Well, that didn't work. China has completely allied with Russia to a point where I make this argument. Since China knows they're next, they can't possibly do, they can't sit aside. If Russia was losing, which they aren't, China would have to join in. If China ever saw that Russia was going to lose, China would come in the war on Russia's side. You can be sure of that. Absolutely. Because it would be either now or never. It would, if they allowed, bottom line is, China knows if the U.S. could defeat Russia and they allowed the U.S. to do it, then the U.S. would only be more powerful when they came after them. So you cannot allow the U.S. to get more powerful and come after you. So even if Russia was losing, which they aren't, China would have to enter the war on their side. They'd have no choice. So knowing that, they become an economic backstop for Russia and a diplomatic backstop for Russia. So the U.S. felt they could dominate the global South. Well, the global South has fully peeled away from the U.S. They've reminded basically the U.S. and the colonial powers, look, you guys treated us like crap for centuries. You stole our stuff. You overthrew our government. You killed our leaders. We're out. We're done. We're siding with Russia. The Middle East, the U.S. expected that they had all of these puppets in the Middle East and that the Ukraine war started and they could call on all of their puppets, right? Well, that ain't happening anymore. The biggest, the most puppets of all puppetry there, they dropped the U.S. And I think there were a couple of things. I think, number one, they don't respect the U.S. and they respect Russia. They have good relationship with Russia, and it's based on mutual benefit as opposed to domination. It couldn't be a worse time for Israel to finally, reveal that, the true, really extremist government that they have, and to completely infuriate the Muslim world by, Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben Gvir and these people. These people are really, really extremist, violent extremists. And I think that has served to, number one, bring the Muslim world together in opposition to the way they're treating the Palestinians and the extreme actions they're taking against the Palestinians. And in turn, that has infuriated the Muslim world against both Israel and Israel's patron, which is the U.S. So they recoiled in horror. The Muslim world, the Muslim leaders recoiled in horror at the statements and actions that came out of the new Israeli government. And they were furious at the U.S. over supporting these people. And they also recognized that the U.S. attacked, I think there was a big U-turn also in the Muslim world after Germany, after the Nord Stream. I think they realized these people bombed the hell out of their allies. That they're no friends to ours. We got to get out of here. So I think the Nord Stream bombing was another thing that influenced potential allies or former allies to jump ship. So the bottom line is the Middle East is all on board with Russia. And another big blunder that was made, and that was the price caps, going after oil price caps, going after Russia's oil, saying we can decide what the price is. Because at that point, the OPEC nations realized, you know what, if you're going to do it to Russia, you're going to start doing that, period. You're going to want to now control the price of oil, and you're going to be able, and once the US empire controls the price of oil, everyone knows they'll use it as a weapon. So now they can say to Saudi Arabia, they can say to Kuwait, they can say to all of these countries, look, if you don't do what we tell you, we're going to raise the price of oil. We're going to lower the price of oil. We're going to manipulate the price of oil, whatever the case may be. So now they're in a position. What's going on with my tie here? They're in a position to control the price of oil. The OPEC countries didn't buy into that, didn't like that at all. And that was another one of the nails in the coffin of the relationships between the US and the Middle East. So you have that economic war, and of course seizing the money of Russia, having stolen the money from Libya, having seized the money from Venezuela, on and on and on. So now you've got all of these countries saying, number one, I got a lot of investments tied up in the US, and I now see that I can't trust that those investments are safe. We see them attacking their allies if it benefits them. We see them trying to manipulate prices, and we know they will not spare us. If they can manipulate the prices, they'll tell us they will control the prices to our detriment. So at that point, they realized their best bet was to go on with Russia and China. And what do we see? We see the peace deal. So the actions, the Ukraine conflict, and the actions that the U.S. have taken it has created a dynamic where their goal for world domination is only getting further and further away. The African countries, let me tell you something that I can tell you for sure. One of the things, there were a number of things that affect the African countries. Number one, of course, the U.S. is allied with these colonial powers in Europe that have dominated and mistreated the African powers, overthrown their leaders, just screwed them for centuries. They ain't happy about that. Then at the beginning of the war, because I saw a lot of this and I saw this discussion happen, at the beginning of the war, one of the things that happened was after, for all of this time, Europe has been like, we don't want any African immigrants. Keep the African immigrants out. Why are the Muslim immigrants, the African immigrants? We don't want them here. Get them out, right? Then all of a sudden, the U.S. was like, Europe suddenly did a 180, and they were like, yes, the Ukrainians, they're blonde-haired and blue-eyed and Christians just like us, and we can't stand to see that happen. Yeah, we could see it happen in Afghanistan and places like that, but not here, right in Europe. So The Africans looked at that and they said, man, those people don't mean us no good. It really is about, us being black. That's the way the Africans saw it. They're like, man, when it comes to us, no immigrants. When it comes to the Ukrainians, come on, to the point where they're paying people to look out for the immigrants. They're giving people money. They're giving you everything. They're throwing Middle Eastern and African immigrants out to make room for the Ukrainians. That had an effect on the Africans. That caused them to say, well, the Chinese and the Russians don't treat us like that. We're not second-class citizens. We want to be treated equally. Clearly, the Europeans have shown us who they are. No thanks. So the Africans now are completely on board. They're unabashedly, unapologetically on board with the Russians and the Chinese. That's it. So one of the things, if you're going to dominate the world, it's going to be hard to dominate the world when Middle East, the entire Muslim world, when the African world, when the indigenous world of Latin America all reject you, when most of Asia rejects you, when Eurasia rejects you, the world. So what happened was, in trying to dominate the world, the United States created a dynamic where the only thing they can dominate are the people that they were dominating before, which is their empire, the inner circle of their empire: Canada, Australia, UK, Europe. That's it. That's all they got. And so a Ukrainian conflict that was supposed to broaden and reestablish their control, their hegemonic control over the world, has I'll put it like this: exposed that they didn't have it in the first place. That what they're fighting to hold, they didn't have. That the people that they thought in Africa and the Middle East and Latin America that they thought were kind of under their umbrella were really just captors. So the Africans, they thought, okay, the Africans do what we want because they recognize us as the authority. No, they did what they want because of you use coercion. The Africans, the Middle Easterns did what you were now finding. They did what the neocons in Washington wanted because the neocons in Washington would attack them or bomb them or overthrow them. As long as they didn't feel that they had another option or they could get out from under this violent beast that is the U.S. empire, they go along with it. Now they see an alternative. And not only are they standing up for their foreign policy and for their associations and their ties with Russia and China, they're getting more vocal about it. Now they're feeling like, and they're looking around and they're saying, hey, it's not just me. All of these countries are together. And now you can see videos of European leaders going to Africa and African leaders basically lighting into them and saying, giving them a piece of their mind. You see Lula, I'm not saying he's perfect, but you see him going to China saying we need to spend money in no more in dollars. We need to spend money in our own currencies. And you see that happening. That's another very important, critical part of this Ukraine conflict that is going to be counterproductive for the neocons' plan for hegemony. Man, they slammed themselves right into a wall. They just saw a wall ahead and they just floored it, slammed right into the wall. Because a big part of U.S. hegemony and their plan to spread their hegemony is what? The dollar. Everybody uses the dollar as the world currency. As a result of this conflict, the U.S. decided they were going to put massive sanctions on the Russians, one of the most powerful, one of the world powers, right? They're going to now put massive sanctions on it. And the sanctions didn't bite. The sanctions didn't do what they intended to do. So now the world is not as afraid of sanctions. And because Russia is heavily sanctioned and people need their stuff, the world is like, well, look, we got to trade with Russia anyway. Even Europe, we got to trade with Russia. We need their fertilizer or we can't feed our people. We need certain things. We need their gas or their oil. Our society cannot operate without Russia. We need their stuff. That's what the world is saying. So when the U.S. decided we're going to sanction Russia out of existence, it exposed the reality that there's a lot of countries that can't, I don't care about your sanctions. They're like, on one hand, we've got U.S. sanctions. On the other hand, we got, if we stop doing business with Russia, our country falls into disarray. We'll take our chances with the U.S. sanctions. So now the U.S. is sending a couple people around the country to follow. Here's over a year later, they're sending a couple people around the world to go to from country to country to remind them, hey, you'll be sanctions if you do whatever, this or that for Russia, with Russia. So clearly, if you're over a year into the conflict and you're going around the world begging and threatening, don't do business with Russia. You better not. You'll be in trouble. Don't you dare do business. You're running around asking people. You know why you got to ask them not to do business with Russia? Because they're doing business with Russia, and they ain't going to stop because they don't have that option. And what are you going to do? Every country in Africa, every country in Latin America, every country in the Middle East, virtually every country in Asia, you are all sanctioned. Everybody's sanctioned. The world is sanctioned. The sun is sanctioned. The moon, the stars are sanctioned. You see that earthworm down there crawling around? Yeah, he's sanctioned. Hey, a bird just flew by. He's sanctioned. Everybody's sanctioned. At the point that everybody's sanctioned, nobody's sanctioned. At that point, because they're all saying, well, we'll just do business in our own currency. And now, before you know it, they have created a dynamic where the other world powers feel necessary, feel it necessary to create alternative currencies. So now, not only have you exposed that all of the global South can't stand you, that let's be honest about it. The global South looks at the U.S. and feels like, man, your leadership is treating us differently than you treat the rest of the world. They feel like that there's like a racism thing. That's the way they feel. That's the way the global South feels. That's the way Africa feels. That's the way Latin America feels, that they're being treated differently. And they feel that Russia and China give them an honest shot, give them a fair business deal. So now that they feel that, you ain't changing their minds, because there's a lot of valid reasons for that. They ain't going to do business. They're going to do business with the people that they feel gives them an honest shot, gives them a fair deal. That's just the way it is. That's the way anybody would do. So now they're looking at doing business. Everybody's looking at doing business in their own currencies, which strengthens their own currencies. And of course, ultimately alternative currencies, and to get out from under the dollar, because if you're sanctioned, if me and you do business in dollars, the US can screw us over. If we do business in rupees and rubles and riyal and renminbi and all that stuff, then the US doesn't even know it. They can't touch us. So you've created that. You've created the economic issue. Diplomatically, what happens? People start Saudi Arabia, some of these other countries look at you and they're like, yeah, you guys are out of your mind. China walks over and says, hey, how about a peace deal? And Russia was involved in that peace deal. Apparently, my understanding is the Saudis talked to the Russians first. The Russians brought the Chinese into it. Bottom line is the Saudis and the Iranians both know, let's face it, they know that to sign that peace deal with China puts the screws to the U.S. empire. And I think that's one of the reasons that they did it. Saudi Arabia also knows that Iran is on good terms with the BRICS countries. And that if they're going to get into BRICS, if they're going to get into Shanghai Cooperation Organization, if they're going to get into these new economic groups that if they're going to get into these new economic groups that are growing, that everybody wants to move into, this is the place to be economically. The new world is going into directions of BRIC and the Shanghai Cooperation or Organization, things of that nature. They know they're going to have to be friends with the other countries that are in that. They're not going to be, Iran, it's got to weigh in. Certainly, they're tight with Russia and China. So they know, Saudi Arabia already knows, I want to get in, Iran's going to get in. And Iran's tight with those guys. If I want to get in, I better be friends with Iran. That's what these countries are looking at. If I want to get into this new group that's forming economically, as I watch the U.S. empire go to hell, right? This new group economically, I'm going to have to make friends with everybody in the group. I see, and I'm hearing some things, I see India and China now talking about working out their border dispute. I see that happen. I think that's a priority for Russia. Russia and China are tight. I think they need India in that trifecta there, right? I think they need India in. Russia and India are very tight. I think they need to deal with that border dispute, bring China in. And then you're going to have, just think about this, Russia, China and India are what, 1.5 billion people or something. So you're upwards with the three of those entities right now, you get close to 3 billion people out of a planet of what, 7 billion? Just those three are 3 billion. And Russia and China, because they're friends with Africa, they bring another, I don't know, a couple billion, whatever, how many people in Africa. They bring Africa along with them. They bring the Muslim world along with them. China brings almost all of Asia along with them. Now what you have is this gigantic economic sphere that dwarfs the U.S. empire. So again, starting this war created the dynamic where Russia and China got closer and started doing business out of the dollar along with everybody else, where China is, I'm sure from what I'm reading now, looking at, hey, we've got to repair our relationship with India. If not, they may be pissed at India. They may not even like India, but it's in their best interest from a geopolitical perspective to do that. And I think that's what we're going to look at now. India's in a tough position, but they're doing what they got to do, because India recognizes, look, we're growing. The U.S. is going to come after us next. They know that we need oil. We need these things, and Russia's got plenty of it. China's got plenty of this stuff we need at some point. They also know that at some point the U.S. empire is coming after them just out of anger, if nothing else. So India is a big player here, but they're wise enough to see the direction that they should go in. And again, Ukraine, you don't have Ukraine, if the neocons don't create this Ukraine conflict, don't drive this Ukraine conflict to happen, to go after Russia, all of the rest of these things don't happen. They're still floating where they were a couple years ago. Don't get me wrong. The unipolar world is kind of dead, but they have a lot more than they do now. It's blatantly obvious that they're falling apart. And the other thing that's happening is people are seeing that NATO ain't what they thought it was. People who are concerned or afraid of NATO are looking at NATO saying these people are idiots. Number one, it's not well led. They're looking at Schultz. They're looking at the Liz Trusses of the world. They're looking at these decisions that have been made by this group, and they're saying, number one, it's not a defensive alliance, as they said. Everybody can see now that it's an aggressive, assertive, dangerous military alliance. They're looking at the U.S. empire saying these states are embarrassing themselves in Europe. They're nothing but vassal states, and they're not acting in their own best interest. So they've been embarrassed and humiliated themselves. And again, the U.S. is exposed that it's an authoritarian regime, country that treats its vassal states, its sub-states, with disdain and contempt, and will not hesitate to take out its anger on them. It's like the guy that comes home and kicks his dog. Well, because he had a bad day at work. Bad news, Europe. You're the dog. So the U.S. isn't doing well. It kicks Europe. And you don't do what you're told, they're going to blow up your pipeline. So this Ukrainian mess that the U.S. has gotten itself into has exposed all of their weaknesses. Another thing that it's done is this. It's exposed the rhetorical weaknesses. As the U.S. says certain things, you can't invade your neighbor. People are like, well, is it all right to go across the world and invade Iraq or Libya? So and people are asking questions. You are occupying Syria right now. So the U.S. and normally the U.S. is, if it's not involved, it'll try to take the high road, the moral road. It'll make these high-minded moral claims, and people in the background say, well, historically, look what you've done. But in this instance, as they're doing it, they're still occupying Syria. As they're doing it, at the same time, the U.S. is making claims, high-minded moral claims about the evil things that Russia is doing. Other countries are looking at it saying, you're doing that to our country right now. So that's exposed the lack of diplomacy and the hypocrisy and the contradictions of the U.S. empire. Additionally, I would have to say this. It's really throwing a monkey wrench in their China plans for a number of reasons. Number one, their plan is go after Russia first, weaken Russia, then go after China, right? You got to take down everybody. I mean, it sounds insane when you think about it. There are other world powers, and one of the world powers believes it has to destroy the other world of the other two world powers, right? How stupid is that? But what happens to your plan when your plan is we're going to destroy Russia and then we're going after China, and you go after Russia and you strengthen Russia? You don't destroy him. Let's face it. The world is looking at Russia saying the U.S. saying it's a NATO proxy war against Russia. If and when Russia wins this, people are going to say NATO got their ass kicked. Russia took on France and Germany and the UK and the Australia and Canada and US, and all of them took them all on. Come on, bring it. Every one of you, bring it. And they all came on and they all got sent home with their tail between their legs, slapped around. That's the way you can say it's true, false, or indifferent, but that's the way the world will see it. That's the way traditional societies will see it. Traditional societies will say, Putin and Biden, whoever, stood toe to toe, and one of them got their butt kicked and sent home crying. That's the way the world sees it in a more simplistic term. You chose to go up against these people, man, they whooped your ass. And they sent you home. Shut up, move on. Who's going to want to fight with you now? Yay, we're going to go fight China. And even Europe's going to be looking at it like, oh, man, that last one didn't work out so well. And what are we going to fight them with? I mean, they've exhausted their supplies. Again, an important part of this discussion, so I'm not veering away when I say this, going up against Russia and not doing so well, and ultimately what I believe is going to happen will be a military loss in Ukraine, has two outcomes, two results. Number one, as I said, the world looks at you and say, you got your butt kicked. That has a significant impact on your ability to maintain your dignity around the world, and to keep people afraid of this powerful empire. No, the powerful empire went up against a country who put foot in their behind and sent them off their home. Russia. I mean, the world will see it as the U.S. came up to Russia's border. Russia said, "Get off my border, or I'm gonna kick you off." The U.S. said, "You can't kick me off." Russia said, "Hold my beer," and kicked them off. That's the way it's going to appear. You got kicked off Russia's border. Don't come back. Now, at that point, you're looking at an environment where there's still going to be things going on. The United States on Russia's border can't continue this fight. They can't continue to fight. Number one, because their support at home and the support from the people in Europe is waning due to a lot of economic factors and other things, right? Number two, because they're being demilitarized. One of the effects here is that as I've said before, Russia created a trash compactor in Ukraine, and NATO keeps filling it with trash. Here's some BMPs, here's some whatever the hell, S-300s, here's some M777 howitzers, and blah, 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 blah. Into Ukraine they go, the Russians blow them to smithereens. So now, and you're going to Europe. Europe, give me more, give me more. Everybody, more, more, more. Russia, Israel, give me your stuff. South Korea, give me your stuff. They're hitting everybody. They're begging everybody for more war material. And the more that comes into Russia, the more it gets blasted out of existence. So you have less to fight with. You have exposed the weakness in your military industrial capacity to produce. And the world sees that, and China sees that. And trust me, China ain't got no shortage in the military capacity to produce. But what happens is your allies look at that and say to yourself, because remember I said, if the rest of the world looks at it and says, Russia's demilitarizing NATO and kicking him off the border, your allies, when you say, okay, come on, let's go fight China now, your allies saw that loss. They took that L along with you. And they're going to be like, you haven't even resolved this issue on our border and Russia's border yet. And you want to go start something new? And in a way, I see this, I got mixed emotions. Let me throw it at you. In one way, I see this thing moving kind of fast. You know, you've heard the thing, how do empires collapse? First slowly, then suddenly, right? And I see the Ukraine thing through that lens, that at some time, and I don't think we're a month out from it, maybe a little more, at some point, during early to midsummer, maybe even sooner, but early to midsummer, it starts to become blatantly obvious that the Ukrainians are far short of ammo, that if they, God knows, if they do this offensive and that offensive gets crushed and then the Russians counterattack, that's going to be huge problems. And if they don't, the Russians are just attriting them. The Russians are just sitting there saying, send in more stuff, we'll keep bombing it. Send in more people, we'll keep mangling them with artillery. Okay. So at some point this summer, you just run out of stuff. You start running out of people, you start running out of weapons. And now the Russians start moving. They get on the move and they start overrunning. And at some point it gets to a point where the Ukrainians can no longer adequately resist the might of the Russian army. I think that's what we're coming to. When that happens, early summer, midsummer, I'm thinking a month, 2 months out, the Ukrainians are going to have great difficulty resisting the Russians. At that point, what happens? NATO does not have the wherewithal to enter. They don't have the military wherewithal to say, well, we're going to come in and fight. I have a friend in Poland right now who I've been talking to. And basically what's interesting is this. What he says is, he's been there. He's there now. He said that it doesn't appear to him, from talking to the man and woman on the street, that the people of Poland support the fanatical anti-Russian pro-war policies of the government, that they feel like their government is way out over their skis, when it comes to this thing. And they're concerned, and the people of Poland don't want to go to war with Russia for obvious reasons. So even in a country where the government is gung-ho saying, let's go fight Russia, bring us in, let us fight somewhere, body, Germany, anywhere, we just want to fight, that the people of that country are like, we're not down with that. We're not trying to do that. So you've got the internal resistance and the internal instability right there in Europe. That is going to be a major problem for the neocons to keep Europe on board. So you see, what we're looking at here is, if the Europeans already knew this, but it wasn't in front of their faces, and that is that the security needs of Europe and Russia are aligned. They both need their borders to be secure, where nobody has to worry about the other attacking them. But the U.S. Neocon project is not aligned with either one of them, because first of all, the U.S. Neocon project sees both Russia and the EU as enemies that need to be vanquished, need to be destroyed economically, need to be taken out, consumed, and utilized as fuel for the empire. And number two, the U.S. sees this Russian border issue as one of many moves on a checkboard to maintain world hegemony. So they could care less if they have to sacrifice, if the Europeans and or the Russians make great sacrifices. That's the idea. You guys make sacrifices to keep us in power worldwide. So the people here, the people in the US, really, the Bidens, the neocons, they don't have a grasp on what's going on in Europe, because they don't see it through the lens of the European people and the European working class. The only thing they see, or even the European, they just know that they have European leaders that are compliant, and that's all they need, is to keep them compliant. What else happens in Europe, they could care less. Keep them compliant. And we've seen it where we've read time and again where Biden said, I had to go to the Europes to keep them up strong. I talked to them for hours to keep them on board. Bottom line is, when the Europeans say, man, I got problems at home, my people are upset, my money ain't right, Biden says, stay the course. That's the only thing that matters. Stay the course. In other words, I don't give a shit about all that stuff. Do what we tell you to do. This is for our benefit, not yours anyway. So if you suffer, so be it. But again, that's another wall they're running into. They need, how are you going to have world hegemony if you don't have control of your own empire? And it's slipping away, my friends. It's slipping away. In Europe, you're going to see elections. May not be this year, may not be next year, but you're going to continue to see elections where the people who are elected get further and further and further away from being compliant to the U.S. empire. So watch the elections as they go. Additionally, another thing that's done here, this Ukraine conflict, another major problem that it's caused for the U.S. empire is Taiwan. And here's what I mean. The people of Taiwan can see what's going on. So as, provocateurs such as me, albeit an accidental provocateur, I didn't mean to be a provocateur, but provocateurs such as me are screaming at the Taiwan people, they got a plan to destroy you. You look at Ukraine. How you think that's going to work out for you, right? Look at Ukraine. Come on, Taiwan. Look, I don't have to say anything to you. Take a look at Taiwan. Where do you think your future lies? You are done. The neocons want to do the same thing. You are Ukraine of the Pacific. You are Ukraine 2.0. Ukraine or Tukraine, I guess. That's what you are. So if you go along with these people and you end up being a battle zone between two nuclear superpowers, trust me when I tell you, don't think it's going to work out for your small island. And so the U.S. is playing the same game as they did in Ukraine. We've got to give you more weapons. We got to set you up to deter war with the Chinese. One day we're reading that a U.S. general said, we expect to be at war with China in 2 to 3 years. We see a bunch of Congress members go to China, and one of them comes back and says, we're at war with China. And now the U.S. Congress comes out and says, we're trying to deter a war with China. Well, really? You already said we're at war with China. But we're trying to deter a war with China, as we're at war with China. And how are you going to do that? Well, we're going to cross all their red lines, all the things that China said that if we did these things, if we armed Taiwan, if we gave them claimed independence, if we did all of these things, China said, if you do X, Y, and Z, we're going to go to war. What are you going to do? You neocons, and they're like, well, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. What for? To prevent war, to deter it. And, you know, they just figure, hey, man, weapons of mass destruction work. What the hell? Let's throw this one out there and see if the people are dumb enough to take a bite of this apple. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But the rest of the world isn't that stupid. You see, the other thing they've done is they've driven Turkey away. Turkey has looked at this from a pragmatic perspective. Look, Turkey looked also, they've understood the truth. They're like, our country's mostly Muslim. They'll never accept us in Europe. And they looked and they're like, what happened? The EU. Is Turkey a member of the EU? No, Turkey wanted to be a member of the EU, and they've been on hold since 1999. They ain't getting in. Meanwhile, the U.S. is saying that these friggin' goose-stepping swastika-covered Nazis in Ukraine, how quick, and the same with the of NATO and the EU, how quick can we get these people in the EU as quickly as possible? We must get them in the EU. What about Turkey? Screw those Muslim bastards. No, we don't want them in there. Look at them. They're different from us. How quick can we get the Nazis in? Turkey can see that. And Turkey's like, hey, I think I'm going to throw my hat in the ring with Russia. That's the bottom line. That Turkey, the second largest land army of over 700,000 men in NATO, and basically they're in NATO in name only. So that would be they're nine O's, NATO in name only, right? That's it. And this was created by the Ukrainian conflict. I believe the biggest part of it was that Turkey looked up and they said, you're letting you want to get these people expedite Ukraine, a bunch of swastika-toting Nazis in, and we've been trying to get in the EU since 1999, and the answer is 9 from the Germans. So I think they're like, hey, we can see the writing on the wall. You don't want like our kind? We're going to go with Russia. They're cool. And Russia's had things to offer. Russia said, hey, how'd you like to be a gas hub? Hey, we can offer you gas. We got plenty of it. You can make money. And Turkey's like, that's what we're trying to do. Turkey also understands that it's likely that the U.S. will try to influence and interfere in their elections. They're angry about that. They're making a lot of noise about that. Erdogan feels that the U.S. is going to try to basically do an electoral coup and get somebody else, which, let's face it, ain't going to do a lot of good, because I don't think the opposition is going to go but so far with the U.S. So you got all of those things going on. Now, let me add one last one, Syria. The U.S. and Israel intentionally destabilized Syria, attempted to overthrow the government. The Russians came in and prevented that, right? That was the beginning of the end for the multipolar world. But now something even greater is happening, and that is the U.S. still doesn't want to leave Syria and is trying to hold on to that, right? And meanwhile, don't forget, Iran said, we're going to run you the hell out of the Middle East. After the U.S. killed Soleimani, Iran said, we are going to eject the U.S. from the Middle East. Well, the U.S. took that to mean war, but I don't think that's what the Iranians meant. I think they meant we're going to use our minds, we're going to use our brains, our intellect to play chess and run you out. So now that particularly Russia now is using its influence through OPEC+1, using its influence in the Middle East to get Turkey and Saudi Arabia, etc., to make a peace deal with Syria, so that everybody can say, we want to get Syria back to norm. We want to get Syria back to in the Arab League and to one of the regional countries that's, you know, everything's open and respected. Once that happens, it's going to be hard for the U.S. to maintain sanctions on them, because they're now part of the group, number one. And it's going to be very difficult for the U.S. to continue to keep troops in Syria and to occupy the Syrian oil fields, because all of the Middle Eastern countries are going to come together and say to the U.S., you need to leave Syria. Russia's going to say it, China's going to say it, and of course Turkey's going to say it. They're all going to say to the U.S., you need to leave Syria. You need to stop occupying the oil fields. Now, what I suspect will happen, we see some missile hits and drone hits on the bases in Syria. I expect that the countries in the Middle East will kind of send the message, look, there's a lot of military units, there's a lot of various types of military groups that we don't necessarily control, some that we do. And look, if you don't leave Syria, we can't promise you anything. From now on, we've been telling them, don't shoot at the Americans. We've been holding them off, holding the dogs off. But if you don't leave Syria, we can't do that anymore. So you can stay in Syria, but you're going to have to fight to stay there. Does the United States have the wherewithal, to lose soldiers, to stay in Syria, to fight in Syria when they don't even know who's throwing missiles at them? And how do they continue to resupply when some of the other countries in there are saying, I'm not going to help you? I also think that somewhere in there also is a move to run the U.S. out of Iraq. The U.S. has bases in Iraq. I suspect that you'll see the caravans of U.S. Supply vehicles attacked. I expect to see drone and missile attacks also on the bases in Iraq. So the U.S. is going to get run out of the Middle East where all the oil is. The U.S. has already diplomatically run out of the Middle East. They've already been pushed out of the Middle East diplomatically by China. So the U.S. is not going to have any control whatsoever over the hotbed of energy, the energy production center when it comes to oil anyway, of the world. You're weaker. How are you going to control the world? How are you going to be the world hegemon if you don't control anything other than Europe? And Europe is beat down to hell. When you get finished, the only thing you're going to control is Canada, the U.S. proper, and you're going to control Europe. You're going to control the UK. Other than that, you're going to be out of luck. Yeah, you'll have Singapore, Japan, and South Korea, but I consider them like Europe. They're just after World War II. You built bases of occupation, and you're really occupying those countries. The people in those countries aren't even thrilled, and I suspect the South Korean government, whenever this guy, the current guy who has a very low approval rating, whenever he goes, you're going to have somebody who is in opposition to U.S. Occupation there too. So bottom line is the U.S. in so many ways in trying to take Ukraine in trying to use Ukraine as a battering ram to beat on Russia, to weaken them up, and then to move on to China, to use the Ukrainian conflict as a method, as a tool to reassert their hegemony over weaker countries, has failed at every level. And ultimately, they're going to run into, within the next 2 months, I think, somewhere maybe May, June, July, they're going to run into a situation where the Russians have really defeated whatever's left of the Ukrainian army. And now it's going to be decision time. And the U.S. is just going to say, keep fighting, keep going, keep doing whatever. And there are going to be a lot of people in their coalition, a lot of their vassals in Europe. Some of them will stick with it and say, yes, keep going. And other ones will be like, man, this is getting old. This ain't working for me. So as I think it gets more glaringly obvious that all of the rhetoric about the Ukrainians defeating the Russian army, who were fighting with shovels and out of missiles since last March and blah, 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 that was just, bullcrap. It's going to get more important. And let me add this. The European countries are going to start thinking about next winter, and they're going to be like, man, we got to have come next winter, we got to have gas, and we're in no position to get it now, and we will be in one mell of a hess if next winter comes up and we got no gas. So they're going to be thinking about the future, how they're going to survive next winter into this summer. And I think the U.S. empire is in a world of crap. They started this thing and they slammed into, on their journey to rule the world. I think they have slammed head on into a brick wall, and I don't see a way out. Let's look at we're going to look for super chats. I was going to say, let me start at the top. I was going to say it's going to be the first time ever with 0 super chats, but that's okay. Okay, right, let's go. Mandarin 980 says, afternoon, Garland. I hope you're well. 2 quick questions. Okay, let's go. Did you get your Twitter account sorted out? Well, it's weird because last night I was able to get back on Twitter on my laptop, and apparently today I've been able to get on Twitter on my laptop, but I did have one time this morning on my laptop that it signed me out and I had to sign back in. So I don't know. It's funny that it was doing it more and more over the last couple of weeks. It was locking me out. I was having hella problems both at home and at work, which is on a totally different network. And I did that video about what was going on, and it stopped for the most part. Do you know of the prophecies by the bearer prophet Slender van Rensburg? It involves Germany. No, that sounds interesting. Oh, good old Siener Van Rensburg. What a cool name. No, I don't. But somebody's going to have to hit me to that. Good old Siener Van Rensburg. Huh? How about Sandy? The world is reconsidering if the U.S. is even a legitimate country. You're including the people here. Yeah, this country's falling apart. It's a disaster. It is like some kind of a weird religious crusade going on. All right, nothing happening over there. Well, all right, thanks a lot, everybody. Before I head for the hills, I'll end by saying this. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I just realized something I got to do. Never mind. I got distracted. I'll end by saying this. Thanks, everybody. You can see everything going across the bottom, paypal.com. Buy me a coffee. A lot of people choose buy me a coffee to make donations. I appreciate that. And don't forget, buy me a coffee now. You can do it just like Patreon. You can do a one-time, it'll say buy me a coffee, $5 per coffee, and you can buy 1, 2, 3, however many coffees you want. Or you can do the monthly, I want to now become a subscriber. So you can do Patreon, just like Patreon, which I appreciate. Anybody can do Patreon, $3, $5, $100 million a month, whatever you can afford is appreciated. But you can do that on Buy Me a Coffee too, also. So that's pretty awesome. How about that? Cash App, my information is there. And don't forget, my alternate platform of choice is rockfin.com. And Rockfin's great, has no advertisements. Rockfin has no charge, nothing. You just go on there and you can watch it. No advertisements, no charge. You can become a member. Please become a member of my Rockfin channel. Make sure you hit like here. Become a member of my Rockfin channel at no charge. In case they toss me off here, then at least you'll know immediately where to find me and see all my videos. It's not it's a free speech platform, so I can say whatever the heck I want to over there. Last but not least, what Rockfin does allow, if you can afford it, they allow people to be you can basically sponsor my channel over there by becoming a subscriber. It's $14.99 a month. If you sign up for a year, they give you a couple months free. It's like $12.40 a month. But if you can afford to sponsor my channel, become a subscriber over at Rockfin, I certainly appreciate it. And I have a subscribers only every Wednesday morning at 9 p.m. normally with Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter's going to be out of town for the month of May, so we'll figure something out for Wednesday mornings. But at any rate, if you can afford to sponsor my channel, become a subscriber over at Rockfin. If you can't, just become a member. Doesn't cost anything. The only thing you miss out on is the weekly subscriber show, the one show a week for weekly subscribers. Thanks a lot, everybody. Certainly appreciate it. Have a great day.